For 4 long years, Russian President Vladimir Putin kept making and breaking promises. He told the Russian people that the war was far away, that life would go on more or less as normal, that the sacrifices would be made by other men in other places. And for 4 long years, most Russians believed him, or at least tolerated the lie, since life hadn't changed that much in the first years. But it seems like Russia is reaching a breaking point, and fast. So today, we're going to walk through exactly why and what it might mean for the man in the Kremlin who built his entire reputation on never appearing weak. Let's start with the internet, which sounds almost trivial against the backdrop of tanks, drones, and missiles. Since 2025, Russia's Federal Security Service, the FSB, has been shutting down the country's mobile internet on a scale never seen before. The official explanation was security. Ukrainian drones were navigating using Russian cellular networks, and cutting the signal was meant to blind them. But the shutdowns quickly became something larger than air defense. They became a tool of control, part of a widening crackdown on the free flow of information inside Russia. And the numbers are staggering. By the end of 2025, Russia was recording roughly 2,000 mobile internet shutdowns every single month. To put that in perspective, that's more shutdowns than the entire rest of the world combined experienced in all of 2024. Then it got worse. In March of this year, the authorities switched off mobile internet across Moscow itself for nearly 21 straight days, with no real explanation offered to the millions of people who live there. And Moscow is not a city you can simply unplug. When the signal died, ordinary life seized up. People couldn't pay with their cards, pull up a map to find an address, order a taxi from their phones, or in some cases, even get into a parking garage or a public toilet, because so much of the city's basic infrastructure now runs through an app. The security services had also all but blocked Telegram, one of the most widely used messaging platforms in the country, starting in April 2026. People can dodge the block with a virtual private network, but the state is moving to ban those too. In their place, the government has rolled out its own messaging application, a state-run platform called Max, now pre-installed on phones sold in Russia. But to make matters worse, it would only take a few weeks after that for the government to seemingly reverse course. The platform's fast launch meant it came out with a lack of security features, prompting the command to once again suggest Telegram for frontline forces. So why does this make Russia seem so weak? The answer is control over the narrative. For years, Putin had kept the war comfortably offstage for the residents of Moscow and St. Petersburg, the very people whose contentment matters most to the stability of his regime. The shutdowns made the war and lack of stability front and center in people's minds. Suddenly, the war was not a distant rumble on the evening news. Small businesses were literally losing money because they couldn't run online stores due to outages. 4 years in, and the war had come home, and it had directly affected the daily routine of millions of people who had never been asked to think much about it at all. And those people started to talk. The criticism has been loud, public, and even unusually blunt for a country where speaking out carries real risk. A rapper performing under the name Pataka told his audience that the country was sliding back into the Stone Age, demanding to know whether the people dreaming up these policies had lost their minds. A retired KGB officer named Andrei Bezrukov, hardly a liberal dissident, offered a public rebuke of his own, warning that the state was now working against its own people and simply making their lives worse. And from Monaco, a Russian blogger named Victoria Bonya posted an 18-minute video aimed directly at Putin, in which she described a population that had been robbed of everything and was still being robbed, which immediately went viral in Russia. Importantly, there are no protests, at least not yet. But all of these events, combined with the fact that Russia is slowly but surely losing its grip on the real war figures and will inevitably have to fess up to its public, means that there's now a real risk of exactly that happening. The polling tells the same story in cold figures. In December 2025, the state-run pollster Vitium found that about 78% of Russians said they trusted Putin. By April 2026, just 5 months later, that number had fallen to 65.6%, a drop of 12.2 percentage points that represented a low point for the entire wartime period. Now, you should always treat numbers from a state pollster with caution because they're built to flatter the man in charge, but that's exactly what makes the drop so dangerous. When even the Kremlin's own pollster is publishing a decline like that, the real mood on the street is almost certainly worse. This is supported by the fact that an independent survey by the Levada Center, conducted in February, found that 67% of Russians believe the country should be moving toward peace negotiations. 2/3 of the population are quietly telling the government that they want this to end. The discontent is also being fed by something the Kremlin can't disguise as easily as a foreign war, and that's the state of the Russian economy. For most of this conflict, Russia's economy defied the predictions of collapse. Sanctions came and the economy adapted. Oil kept flowing to new buyers like India and China, and the famous shadow fleet that sold to countries under the guise of foreign flags. Military spending pumped money into factories and wages, and the war-driven boom covered the damage dealt to the economy through inflation. But that's slowly ending. Official data show that Russia's GDP shrank by 0.3% in the first 3 months of this year, the first such reduction since 2023. The Ministry of Economy quietly cut its own forecast for annual growth in 2026, slashing it from 1.3% down to just 0.4%. And independent analysts believe the real picture is considerably worse than officials are willing to admit. For some, Russia is likely entering a more difficult economic period for the simple reason that sustaining the war is becoming increasingly costly. Past one point, Ukraine's defenses just made direct infantry investment a waste of time, money, and people. If we look past the headline figures, the civilian economy looks even more in distress. Business investment has collapsed to its lowest level since the pandemic, because no sane company commits capital to expansion when the future is this uncertain and borrowing this expensive. Manufacturing output outside the war industries is in steep contraction. Even then, Russia practically has no weapons exports, with the Jamestown Foundation suggesting that Russia lost over 90% of its exports. A more conservative analysis from March 2026 indicates that this loss is only 64% in 5 years between 2021 and 2026. Even then, that's a huge amount of income lost. Then there are the banks, and they may be the most dangerous part of the whole picture. Russia's lenders are wrestling with a rising tide of bad business debt, loans that won't be repaid because the borrowers can no longer pay. In April, rumors tore through the country that the government was preparing to freeze or even confiscate ordinary citizens' bank deposits. A fleet of large Telegram channels published what they claimed were leaked central bank documents proving it. Those particular documents were almost certainly fakes, but they managed to trigger a panic, and that was enough. This kind of jitteriness leaves the entire system more vulnerable to a bank run. In a healthy economy, a fake rumor dies quietly. In a frightened one, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And now we come to the leaked documents, the ones that triggered this whole conversation. In May, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky put numbers to all of this in a way that's not been done before. In a statement on Telegram, he claimed that Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service had obtained internal Russian documents, an honest internal assessment of the country's wartime losses that Moscow was trying to hide from the world and from its own citizens alike. Now, it's worth being clear about what these documents are and are not. They are claims relayed by the Ukrainian president, citing his own intelligence service, and the underlying documents have not been made public. That's a different and lower tier of evidence than the figures we've been discussing from named Western institutions. So treat what follows as Ukraine's account, not as an independently confirmed fact. But all of it lines up uncomfortably well with everything the open data already shows. According to Zelensky, the first major indicator in those documents was the shutdown of active oil wells. He said that one Russian oil company had already been forced to suspend operations at around 400 wells. That matters because of the peculiar nature of Russian oil. Restarting a well that's been shut is far harder in Russia than in many other oil-producing countries, mostly due to the geology and the techniques involved. A well that goes quiet doesn't simply switch back on when prices recover. So these were, in Zelensky's framing, significant and lasting losses rather than a temporary pause. The second indicator was a drop in refining. Russian oil refining volumes, he claimed, had fallen by at least 10% over the first several months of this year, a decline he tied directly to Ukraine's campaign of long-range strikes against Russian energy infrastructure. Then we come back to the banks. The leaked assessment described 11 Russian financial institutions preparing for liquidation, with another 8 carrying critical problems that wouldn't be solvable without outside resources. Again, these are Ukrainian intelligence claims. But set them beside the Russian government's own admission of contraction, beside the double deficit measured by independent economists, beside the bad debt crisis Western analysts have described for months, and the leaked picture stops looking like wishful propaganda and starts looking like a darker version of a story everyone can already see. The oil weakness is especially revealing because by all accounts, 2026 should have been an excellent year for Russian energy revenue. The war in Iran sent global oil prices soaring, climbing by over 50% in just 3 months between February and May. And that price spike was so disruptive to world markets that the United States actually waived sanctions on Russian oil exports to keep the crude flowing. Putin should have been swimming in money, and for a moment he was. In March, Russia's oil export revenue practically doubled from the same month last year and was the highest monthly total since 2023. But this won't be enough. But before we get into why, make sure you're subscribed to the Military Show so you don't miss any news on global geopolitics. We post daily videos detailing recent events, major turnabouts, and vital information you need to know. Back to Russia's seeming oil crisis. A big part of that is that Ukraine's strikes on refineries and energy infrastructure have curbed any attempt at an economic windfall by directly reducing how much oil Russia can produce and export. By early April 2026, Russia's oil exports had dropped to 3.5 million barrels a day, down from an average of 5.2 million in the period before, according to an analysis by Carnegie Endowment. Over the course of 2 weeks, that's about 30 million barrels in foreign sales carved away precisely when prices were at their highest. Even last year, Ukraine struck at least 21 of Russia's 38 refineries, causing fuel shortages, price rises, and long lines at petrol stations. And the campaign is intensifying, thanks in no small part to the fact that Ukraine has developed long-range drones to strike deeper into Russia's territory than ever before. One night in mid-May, Ukraine launched 600 long-range drones at Moscow in one of the largest such attacks of the entire war, with many penetrating the capital's defenses and striking its largest refinery for the first time. While the economy buckles, the picture on the battlefield has quietly turned as well, and this may be the development that frightens the Kremlin most, because it strikes directly at the source of Putin's authority. In December 2025, Russia was ambling forward, claiming nearly 7 square miles of Ukrainian territory every single day, according to the Institute for the Study of War. Then the advances began to slow. By February 2026, for the first time since July 2023, the advantage marker reversed as Ukraine started making net territorial gains. The reason is not simply courage or luck. It's technology and an industrial base learning to innovate at terrifying speed. Ukraine's newest drones have expanded the kill zone, the deadly stretch of ground that attacking troops must cross before they can take and hold territory. That zone is now so lethal that Russian forces can no longer amass into the large assault groups of 30 men that once overwhelmed Ukrainian lines. They're forced instead to creep forward in tiny teams of 2 or 3. Robert Brovdeep, the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, suggested that although drones make up 2% of Ukraine's military, they account for a third of all the targets it destroys. And remember, there are long-range strikes to account for, where Ukraine is steadily attacking infrastructure more than 60 miles behind the front. But how did it come to this? The ongoing war of attrition was technically supposed to be Russia's to win. On the brutal logic, they had more men to throw into the grinder than Ukraine. But the arithmetic has finally caught up. Data since December of 2025 suggests that Russia's casualties now exceed the number of recruits it can get. The Economist has calculated that roughly 3% of Russia's entire male population of fighting age has been killed or wounded in this war by mid-2026. Putin had previously avoided the political nightmare of a full mobilization by buying his soldiers instead. The state dangled signing bonuses and salaries that were too large to refuse for men in poorer regions, at some point reaching more than the average annual salary in Russia. But that pool is starting to run out, and Russia has been forced to find recruits elsewhere. Remember the 11,000 North Korean troops who were sent to fight for Russia and were written about in late 2024? That was apparently just the start, as Russia managed to get 1,700 recruits from African countries, including Zimbabwe and Kenya. But ultimately, those numbers are a drop in the ocean compared to what Russia needs in terms of manpower. So the Kremlin is reaching for backdoor measures. In October 2025, Putin amended a federal law so that reservists can be called up even under the fiction that it's not a war but a special military operation. and the state has begun pressing its own companies into service as recruiters, handing them quotas of soldiers to deliver. In January 2026, the state changed its conscription to year-round, meaning that men could be called up at any point if they need to serve, and the bonuses have been climbing steadily all the while. Every one of those options pours more pain back into a drowning economy, because every man sent to the front is a worker pulled out of a labour market that's already desperately short of hands. If you want a single image that captures how far this has gone, look at the Red Square at the Victory Day parade in 2026. For Putin, that parade is sacred political theatre. It's built to intimidate, to display Russia as a great military power, and to wrap the current war in the glory of the Soviet defeat of Nazi Germany. This year was a shadow of that. Short on heavy equipment and in constant fear that the Ukrainians might strike the event itself, all the equipment that would have actually been paraded on the street was instead shown on television screens. Foreign leaders were conspicuously absent, including China's Xi Jinping. Most humiliating of all, the parade could only go ahead after the United States brokered a 3-day ceasefire, with Zelensky jokingly announcing that he would permit the holding of a parade. And Putin's failures on the battlefield are now drawing fire from an unexpected direction. The pro-war camp in Russia, from the very hardliners who wanted him to fight harder. Abbas Galyamov, who once wrote speeches for Putin and is now an opposition figure abroad, told the Wall Street Journal that the turning point came in January, the month when the war in Ukraine finally lasted longer than the Soviet Union's entire war against Nazi Germany. When even the people who want more war are mocking your competence, you're in a dangerous place, and Putin appears to feel it. The Kremlin is now busy staging more propaganda, showing Putin meeting various people outdoors in regular clothing and surrounded not by servicemen but by regular people. The entire show is a facade meant to dissuade any claims that Putin has been hiding in bunkers when he's not photographed making self-important speeches. All of this is now bleeding into the question of how and whether the war ends. The American-led negotiations that were supposed to happen last year stalled after President Donald Trump took office. After months of little progress, the US formally withdrew from the negotiations, leaving Ukraine and the rest of Europe on one side and Russia on the other. In early 2026, Trump was consumed by the war in Iran, and having cut off funding to Ukraine, he had also lost much of his leverage over Kyiv. But even without support from the world's largest military, Ukraine is seemingly thriving. The rest of Europe picked up the slack and started sending more equipment and aid, forming the coalition of the willing to discuss the future of the war, up to possibly even directly intervening with their own troops. Putin himself also cryptically suggested that the war might be coming to an end shortly after the victory parade. But then he again stated that he was the wronged party, suggesting that he would meet Zelensky when Ukraine agreed to a lasting peace. Based on previous announcements, this falls in line with Russia trying to extract as much as possible from Ukraine for providing no guarantees. There's also a darker possibility hanging over everything we've discussed. The internet shutdowns, the crackdown, the growing influence of the FSB, all of it points towards a regime preparing to extract still more from its exhausted population by force. Russia could be laying the groundwork to crush any resistance to the harsher measures the war will demand. And it points to a chilling precedent. In January, Russia's ally Iran imposed a nationwide internet shutdown and used the resulting darkness as cover for a massacre that reportedly killed as many as over 30,000 civilians. Thus, the only real question is how far Putin is willing to go to hold on to power. But even that might not be enough. If you want to learn more about how the Kremlin feels about Putin, check out this video. Then, make sure to subscribe to The Military Show for more news on global geopolitics.